So I started writing them, largely pushed into it by a colleague of mine who got rather annoyed by the fact that I was constantly complaining about the material being sent in. And he kept saying, well, you try one yourself. And I did. And I ended up writing about 30 of them, and which is where I got the practice to write, you know. And it's a craft, and you have to learn it. And in the end, they would commission me to write prototypes. Lots of the magazines would, simply because, having read so many manuscripts, seeing where people were going wrong, I could see how to do it. And so I was able to sort of set a blueprint for other people to read and then follow. And it was fantastic. It was the most fantastic practice. So then when I stopped writing for 7 years when my children were small, but when I came to do a novel, which I'd never ever tried before, I'd got all that great background that I'd learnt and had brought with me into writing a mystery. And I think your question, I think I've diverged a bit.
Sorry, that was fascinating. Why a mystery was my question. Why a mystery,
yes. Well, largely because I'd always wanted to. Because I always realised that it was a challenge to an author to write a mystery. Because I mean, the way I see it, very simply, is that when I sit down on start page 1, I am taking you on as my reader, and let's use you because you can only take on one reader at a time. Okay. So we use you. I'm taking you on, and I'm saying to you, come on, Barbara, we're going to play a game together, and I'm going to lead you in a very convoluted way towards an ending. And you, because you like to play Scrabble and Trivial Pursuit and all these things, and you like to win, and I like to win, and I like to play these games as well. You and I lock brains in this thing. We engage together. Right. And one of us is going to get to the end first. You want it to be you. You want to try and beat me at my own game. I'd like to beat you, okay? Now, multiply that up by 1 million, because I think I have about 1 million readers around the world. Multiply by 1 million. Actually, now you see why there's such a buzz in writing, and particularly writing crime fiction. I'm taking on 1 million readers, and I'm trying to beat all of them. And that's how I see it, because it is fantasy. There's a lot of social realism in what most of us write these days, and I put social realism into my writing. But at the end of the day, it's fantasy, and it's the whole mystery genre, to me, is about two people using their imagination to enter into a fantasy world and to try and beat each other.
I think that's a marvelous description. Could you say, perhaps, that a mystery is really an adult fairy tale with a puzzle?
Well, I would say so, because you see, to me, the crime genre is the purest form of storytelling. And the reason I say that is because it has to have an ending that's as good as its beginning. Now, lots of storytelling these days, the ending is not as important, you know, and the books will lead up towards an ending, but in a sense, some people will put in the punchline, others won't. With crime fiction, you cannot avoid that ending. It has to be there. However you choose to write your ending, whether you want to make it uncertain or have some uncertainty in it, it's got to be very good, because that is what you're leading up to. If I engage you at the beginning, if I throw down the gauntlet to you and say, come on, join me in this, and then I let you down at the end because I can't be bothered to finish it off properly, and you think, oh, you know, hopeless, not going to bother with that one again. And that would be fairly said, I think, because I have teased you all the way through that it's getting to the end that's important.
Absolutely, and I like the challenge of the readers you point out, knowing me well, as Minette and I do, know each other reasonably well. And you know, that's a fun thing too about being an author and a reader, is that you have all kinds of accumulated conversations that haven't actually happened physically, but in fact happen across the medium of the printed word, so that in any conversation that I might have with an author, I've got a subtext, a whole other backlog of conversations I've already had with you. You know, you've said lots to me in the printed page. And sometimes, of course, these things coalesce when one meets an author, and sometimes one says, wait, we obviously have misinterpreted, or, you know, I mean, it's fascinating. It's a real risk, I think, sometimes to meet an author. It happens to me very seldom, but I do know people who have met an author and afterward wished they had not, because they liked the written conversation much better than they ever liked the personal conversation. But nonetheless, you're right, I like to win, and I think that the puzzle, the challenge to the reader is very important. And I also like the play fair, you know, to bring in something at the end to solve the story that wasn't present in the book, so that the reader could never have known it.
Yes,
It's cheating, you know,
cheating.
tremendously so. And therefore, if you win, having done that, you know, I have a right to say, foul.
Absolutely. Oh, I agree with you. In fact, I was talking to a reader a couple of days ago, and she makes notes. She said to me, you know, whenever I read your books, what I do is I sit down and I make notes. And she said, I think twice she's worked it out, and 3 times she hasn't, because she's read the newest one. And I said, great, you mean I'm one up at the moment? I said, okay, right, well, you know, when I've written, we'll have to keep, I said, we'll have to have a correspondence going, because, you know, I think if I end up one up when at the end of my career on this woman, because she's a reader I totally enjoy. I love the idea that somebody is so enthusiastic, so engaged with what I do, that actually she sits there and makes notes. And I thought, what more can I as an author ask?
That's an excellent point. And of course, what she's basically doing is, you have taken the bare bones and fleshed them. She is basically flaying it down to the bare. I love the words, but that's true. It's really what she is doing, isn't it? Is flaying it back to the bones.
She's trying to see where. Well, in fact, as I always say with my books, all you really have to decide is whether the truth that people are saying in the books is absolute truth or relative truth. In other words, is it true, or is it only a truth filtered through their perceptions? If you can decide, I mean, an easy one to take is The Sculptress. And if you take Sister Bridget and The Sculptress, you see, what she says is, you have to understand that right at the beginning, when she's talking to Ros at the start, the first time they meet, she says, I never liked Olive.
Right.
Okay? Therefore, you have to understand that everything she says
is filtered through
through her dislike of Olive. So you then have to decide, because you think to yourself, well, this woman's a nun. She's bound to be speaking the truth. But she didn't like Olive. And that's, I always say, if that gives you a hint on how to work out my books, always think about what the people actually say, and try and work out what is the truth and what isn't, and then you'll beat me at my own game.
That's a wonderful insight. I always think in The Sculptress, too, that one has to allow for the journalist, as she's progressing through the story, how much of it is her agenda and how much of it is Olive. And, you know, is she, well, yes, it is, obviously, because she has a very definite agenda. And if there is some ambiguity at the end, is it because of these different perceptions that you have filtered through? Which leads me, in fact, to an interesting point, which is why I'm sitting here with this pile of paper in my lap, which is that someone recently sent me a scholarly article to be presented at a convocation of popular culture, I believe it is, at some point, on ambiguities in the mysteries of Minette Walters. And since you have not seen this article, nor do you know what ambiguities we are, I thought that I might ask you about a few of the questions she raises, and that we could debate them, because I thought they were truly fascinating. One of the things that she does say is a characteristic of the traditional detective novel, and which I do agree with, is that normally it provides certainty and closure, which is to say that there is a beginning, a middle, and an end. There is a disruption in the social fabric from the crime, and eventually, presumably, some resolution through the detecting process, whatever it is that may bring that. And at the conclusion, questions will generally be answered. Who did it? Why did it happen? And what is the fate, in fact, of, we already know what the fate of the victim was, so what, in fact, will be the fate of the person identified as having committed the crime?